The Gemara tells us, as the month of Adar begins, this is the month which we're in right now, which is the month of Purim. From the very beginning of the month, we increase our levels of celebration, of joy. Why? Because Haman, who was the viceroy of the Persian Empire, had extracted from the Persian emperor, whose name was Achashverosh, permission to issue a decree to annihilate every Jewish man, woman, and child in the empire. And Achashverosh's empire stretched through the whole world. He reigned the world supreme. That means, if God forbid this decree would have been carried out, there wouldn't have been one surviving Jew on the face of the earth. Miraculously, as we'll discuss, at the last moment, there was a change of events. And rather than the Jewish people being annihilated, the Amalekites, who were the sworn enemies of the Jews, were destroyed. Not every one of them, but we were given permission by Achashverosh, who was married to a Jewess, who he wasn't aware of. That's Esther. That the Jews that lived in open cities were permitted on the 13th of Adar to kill our enemies. So for a day, throughout the world, the Jews who live in those communities were engaged in battle against the Amalekites. And Achashverosh says to his queen, "Are you satisfied?" She says, "I think the people who live in Shushan, which was the capital city of the empire, should be given another day, an additional day to kill our enemies." So the members of the Shushan community were given an additional day. So they themselves could not celebrate the victory on the 14th because they were engaged in battle on the 14th. So therefore, they celebrated on the 15th, the 15th of Adar. So every walled city that the wall stands from the time of Yeshua ben Nun, Joshua, who was the successor of Moshe Rabbeinu, if that city had a wall when the Jews entered into the land of Canaan, going back that far back, that community reads the Megillah on the 15th. Purim is on the 15th. To commemorate what happened in Shushan. Every other city that does not have a wall, we celebrated on the 14th. Because the respite was on the ending of the 13th, we're able to celebrate on the 14th. So because the basis for the survival of the Jewish people was during this month, and we exist for that reason, therefore the month itself is a month of joy. We celebrate, we increase our levels of joy from the beginning of the month, although the victory did not take place until the end of the 13th. But what was the end result of this? If you read in the Torah, the time of Sinai, the Torah tells us the Jews were under the mountain. And the Talmud explains that when we received the Torah at Sinai, it was under coercion. God put a mountain over our heads and says, either you accept the Torah or you can be buried under the mountain. That's what he said. And the Jews said, we accept. So because it was under duress, qualitatively speaking, it wasn't the most advanced level of entry into a relationship with God. As a result of Purim, with God literally snatched us from the jaws of the lion at the last second, and we killed the lion, the Jews came to a realization what we mean to God. The God leaves no stone unturned that we should survive and not even be scathed. When we came to that new level of recognition, of realization of our relation with God, there was a reaffirmation of that original acceptance of Torah and it's referred to as Kabbalah mi'avo. They accepted Torah out of love. It was no longer under duress. So as a result of that, spiritually speaking, it was a spiritual upgrade of the quality of the relationship we have with God from Purim going forward. That was the end result of the miracle of Purim. So what's really the Marbim B'Simcha? Of rejoicing that we were saved. God performed this miracle for us. But in essence, what is the ultimate value? The ultimate value is that our relationship with God today is at a different level because of the miracle of Purim, the way we processed it, the way we internalized it. We realize that God is not here just to extract a pound of flesh from us, but rather God gave us the Torah out of love, and that's why he saved us the last moment to come to the level of understanding to what degree he loves us. So it's interesting. There's a medrash which tells us, the Jews were told that when they leave Egypt, they have to borrow the valuables, the personal effects from the Egyptians, the gold, the silver, and the ornate garments. Why? Because Hashem had said to Avram, who's the founding father of Jewish people, that they will be enslaved in a land that's not theirs, and strangers, they'll be afflicted. And after that, they will go out with great wealth. So to be able to fulfill that promise to Avram, we were told that before we leave Egypt, we have to borrow the personal effects of the Egyptians to take it with us, not to return it. Therefore, there was a mitzvah for every Jew to borrow from his neighbor, the woman from her neighbor, the man from his neighbor, the gold and silver vessels. Okay? And the Talmud tells us that every Jew took out no less than 10 pack animals, donkeys, laden with gold and silver. That's the wealth we took out of Egypt. However, the Midrash tells us that the wealth that we were promised after we were redeemed from Egypt was the giving of Torah at Sinai. Hear this? That was the ultimate wealth. The wealth was the Torah at Sinai. Could you hold one moment? Shaya, Vakasha. Hello? Okay. So the question is, it says in the Midrash that the great wealth is Sinai, is receiving the Torah at Sinai. So it seems to be contradictory from what's explicit in the Torah. The Midrash says the great wealth was Sinai, the receiving Torah at Sinai. And here it says explicitly in the verse, they were told to borrow the personal effects of the Egyptians, and that was the great wealth. So how do we reconcile the Midrash with the text? That's the question which is asked. So I mentioned in the past, there's a famous word from the Dubna Magid, who he explained everything with an allegory. And he explains it this way. He says, what is it analogous to? There was this young man who needed a summer job. And his father calls his friend who has a farm, and it says, my son needs a job for the summer. Could you employ him for the next 2-3 months? He's off from school. So the friend says, not a problem, but he has to be here at dawn. He's going to work from dawn to dusk, and it's a lot of physical labor. It's not a problem. I will compensate him very handsomely for his work. Okay? The son every day is there, works from dawn to dusk. After 3 months, the employer takes a piece of paper, takes a check, writes him a check for $20,000, which is beyond anything what he was worth. There was a problem. The son was illiterate, couldn't read. So he comes home with this piece of paper, the check, and his father sees he's downcast. He's depressed. He says, what's the problem? He says, look here, I walked 3 hard months, dawn to dusk. At the end, he gives me a piece of paper with some scribbling on it. I feel I was abused. The father looks at it, he smiles, and he realizes what his son doesn't understand. So the father calls his friend, he says, do me a favor. Take a little bag, put a few silver coins that jingle, put them in the bag. You make my son the happiest kid in the world. And that's what the employer does. But in essence, he gave him the $20,000 check. And the son comes back. He's walking on air. He's elated, excited. It was worthwhile, all that hard work. So the Dubna Maggid says, well, we left Egypt. What was our capacity to appreciate spirituality? If God would have given us the Torah immediately, we had no relevance to having that level of relationship. So God gave us a few coins that shine and jingle in a bag, because that was our capacity to appreciate. At that level, that was the great wealth we left Egypt. But ultimately, 50 days later, when we stood at the foot of Sinai and God gave us the Torah, then we understood what the prize was. That everything in the world pales to that. That's what it's all about. Then we were ecstatic, because then we had a capacity to appreciate what that was. So let's go further. But even that, it was under duress. Under duress, that was the great wealth we received. I give you the Hope Diamond, and I said this is worth a fortune. And you don't understand. You got to take insurance to insure it and to protect it. And you say, you know something? It's a burden, because the person doesn't understand what it is. He goes to gemology school and he learns and understands, appreciate what that is. The guy's ecstatic. It took 2,000 years later, an event where there's a decree to annihilate us. And all of a sudden, God pulls us out of the brink. And we kill our enemies and we survive. A new qualitative acceptance. Now it's out of love. Because now we have a new appreciation of what that is. This is the true Rechush Gadol. This is the true wealth. The month itself, what was the payoff? The payoff is not that we were saved. What's the value of living as a Jew? We live it for a purpose. The purpose is to live within the context of why we exist, why creation was created. For the sake of Torah, for the sake of the Jewish people. We're the only people who have relevance to be able to have a relationship with God, because our antecedents are Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. No nation in the world has relevance to that. Therefore, Mishenichles Adar, when Adar begins, we already begin rejoicing, because this month is the ultimate month that produced the greatest fruits in the history of existence, that we were able to meet the objective of existence, which was the Torah at the most advanced level, which was accepting a reaffirmation out of love. There's an argument in the Talmud when you celebrate the holidays, what we call Yom Tov. How do we celebrate the holidays? It's an argument in the Gemara. And it's based on how to interpret verses. One says that a person has a choice. Either you could invest the whole day in spirituality, you want to study all day, pray all day, or you could feast all day. Feasting. Eating quality food, drinking quality wine, really taking in the day. You have a choice. God says it's up to you. Either all for yourself or all for me. The other opinion is no, you have to divide the day. Chatzi lochem, chatzi l'Hashem. You celebrate physically, but you have to also be involved in spirituality today. We rule that the way you celebrate is you divide the day. Partial celebration, partial immersion in spirituality. Chatzi lochem, chatzi l'Hashem. Half for God, half for yourselves. But the Talmud tells us, even the one who says that you have a prerogative to choose how you want to invest the day, the 3 days of the year that everybody agrees you have to rejoice. You have to celebrate. You can't have the day only for God. You have to drink and eat and celebrate. What are the 3 days? The first day is Shabbos. Shabbos, there's a mitzvah to have Oneg Shabbos, to enjoy Shabbos in the physical sense. Why? Because the prophet refers to Shabbos as V'korosel Shabbos Oneg. You must declare the Shabbos as Oneg, a day of physical pleasure. Therefore, you have to eat quality food to be able to what? To have that level of experience. Everybody agrees. The second day, which everybody agrees you have to celebrate in the physical sense, the feast, is Shavuos. What's Shavuos? The day that the Torah was given to the Jewish people. You have to celebrate in the physical sense. You can't, it's not your prerogative, all for God, all for yourselves. It has to be part for God, part for yourselves. The third day, everybody agrees you have to have part for God, part for yourself, is Purim. Why? Because when you read the Megillah, it says in the Megillah, it's Yom Mishteh, it's Simcha. It's a day of Mishteh. Mishteh celebration, physical celebration. So we have 3 days, everybody agrees. Shabbos, Shavuos is the day the Torah was given to the Jewish people. And the third day is Purim. Now, what is the common denominator between these 3 days? I mean, seemingly you would say that Shavuos, which is the day of nationhood, that we became God's people, the Torah was given to us, you'd say that day definitely should be all invested in Torah study, not in physical celebration. But no, it's just the contrary, because it was the day that the Torah was given to us, therefore that's the day to celebrate in the physical sense. Why? At Purim, why? So what I had once said, and the way I understand it is this: when does one celebrate? One celebrates to indicate that you've actually achieved a milestone. You met a milestone. When we meet milestones, we celebrate. Person is number 50 in Forbes 500. He celebrates. What about reaches number 3 in Forbes 500? It's another milestone. What about when you hit number 1? That's the ultimate. That's the ultimate. These are milestones. When you reach a milestone, you celebrate. In Hebrew, it's called shleimus. When you achieve a level of perfection, that's a moment for celebration. Now, what is Shabbos? If you person buys a new home, there's a custom that when the home is ready to move in, you have a celebration. It's called Chanukah Sabayis. You're inaugurating the home. The home now, you're making public knowledge, is ready for your residence, to be your domicile. Because the home is complete, now it's moving time. You celebrate. Whenever something reaches a level of perfection, completion, you celebrate. Now, what was the objective of creation? Creation was contingent if the Jews accepted Torah at Sinai. If they don't accept Torah at Sinai, the world reverts back to pre-existence. So what happened at Sinai? The Torah achieved a level of permanence, although it was a qualitative permanence, but it was permanence. Because until then, everything was up in the air. It was contingent what would happen at Sinai. At Sinai, we secured the world. We accepted the Torah. Qualitatively, maybe not, but we secured it. That itself is a new level of achievement of perfection. We gave the world its permanence. Fast forward to Purim. We gave the world its permanence qualitatively, because it was a reaffirmation of Torah out of love. It was under duress. As a result of that, everybody agrees that demands celebration. You celebrate. Therefore, Purim, we celebrate, we feast. Feast is an indication that we've achieved a milestone, and that was the ultimate milestone. As a result of that, as the Talmud tells us, when the month of Adar begins, Marbe B'Simcha, we increase our festivities. Of course, this is the month which ultimately the world achieved its objective at the most qualitative level. We became God's people, and we embraced it out of love, not under duress, under coercion. That's the understanding. All the miracles of Egypt were revealed miracles. As you read the 10 plagues, the splitting of the sea, the giving of Torah at Sinai, how did it happen? You read in the Torah, God brought heaven to earth. The mountain was inflamed, the smoke billowed to heaven, the world quaked, and that's how and God spoke to us openly. That's how the Torah was given at Sinai. That's how we became God's people. Purim, how did it come about? How did the reaffirmation come about? There was a story. What was the story? There was a king by the name of Achashverosh. He was the Persian king. And within a short period of time, he reigned the world supreme. Now, who was Achashverosh? Achashverosh himself was a stable keeper of the previous king. And after the king was found murdered, he became king. It was like a coup almost. And he started with a small portfolio of countries. And eventually, he ruled the world supreme. That's how it starts. 3 years into his reign, he celebrates his coronation. He doesn't celebrate immediately. 3 years into his reign, he celebrates his coronation. And he makes a party for all the members of all 127 countries in the world. And they all come to Shushan to celebrate the coronation of the king. After the last 7 days of this period, he made a party specifically for the members of Shushan. They were all invited to celebrate his entry into being the monarch of the whole world. He waited 3 years. So the obvious question is, why did he wait 3 years? Why didn't he immediately, as soon as he rose to that level of power, of control, should have made it, why did he delay 3 years? So the Talmud asked the question, and the Talmud says something very interesting. How do we end up? Why was the first temple destroyed? Because the Jews failed. The temple was destroyed, the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, we went to exile, went to Babylon. The Navi told us when we left Israel to go to exile, to Babylon, that after 70 years, God is bringing you back. It's very important. After 70 years, God is bringing you back. The king before Achashverosh's name was Belshazzar. Belshazzar, he was a Chaldean king. And he made a calculation, and he knew that the prophet said that after 70 years, they're coming back. That means this person, Belshazzar, after 70 years, the Jews are no longer going to be his subjects. They're leaving. So what did he do? He made a mathematical calculation, and according to what he calculated, the deadline had come, and we're there more than 70 years under his reign. The Jews are not going back. So what did he do? He came to the conclusion, God reneged on his promise to the Jewish people. The Jews are not coming back. They're going there forever. They're forsaken, and they're there forever. What does he do? He takes out the vestments of the high priest, puts them on, hear this? Drinks from the vessels of the temple, the ministering vessels. That night, he was found killed. God sent an angel and killed him. He drank from the vessel of the temple, the holy vessels. So what happened? He miscalculated. According to his calculation, 70 years were up. He started to calculate too early. From the beginning of the exile, all the Jews weren't there yet. And he counted that amount of time into his calculation. It came up, 70 years have come, they're not leaving. They're still here. That proves God reneged. The Jews are here forever. Achashverosh said, you know something? My predecessor made a mistake. The mistake cost him his life. I will make a calculation. I'm not going to make the mistake. And he calculates it. And the 70 years were only up 3 years into his reign. when 3 years into his reign, the 70 years were up, and the Jews are still there. He says, now it's time to celebrate. Therefore, only after 3 years into his reign, he set the coronation, because now he knows he's secure. The Jews are here forever. They're forsaken by God forever. But the Talmud tells us he also made a mistake. He miscalculated. And that's why at the party, at the end of the party, you know what happened? He was drunk, and he says to his inner circle, I want you to bring Vashti. Vashti, who was the granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar, who destroyed the first temple, who was his wife. She was the royalty. And I want to bring her unclothed to show the world her beauty. And she was ready to come. She had no problem. Could you imagine? Calling the queen, the one who's a granddaughter of the Babylonian emperor, she's going to display her body publicly in front of all the ministers. What does God do? God causes it to break out with leprosy. Could you imagine? And she realizes she's not showing herself. And Achshverosh demanded, you must come. She called him a drunken who knows what. I'm not coming. He becomes infuriated, and he has her hanged. He has her killed. Why was she killed? Because since Achshverosh had benefited from the vessels of the temple, he also put on the vestments of the high priest. That's why Vashti was killed, for that reason. But why did God punish her in that way? She's a rabid anti-Semite, this Vashti. Why? Because she had Jewish girls who are the attendants in the palace, and she had them serve her inner circle naked to disgrace them. Hear this? She had them walk around naked, unclothed, because they were Jewish women. God says you're going to pay the price. Someday you're going to be asked to come naked, and you're going to have leprosy all over your body, and you're not going to come. And that rejection of coming is going to cost you your life. And that's why she died in that manner. That was measure for measure. Okay? If you read the narrative of the story of Purim, it's a very interesting narrative. It comes out she was killed, Vashti. And what happens? So he's advised by his inner circle, his 7 advisors, we must seek out a new queen immediately. So they sent, and they start bringing in hundreds and thousands of women into the palace. And the Achshverosh, it didn't make a difference whether they were married women, single women, virgins, not virgins. He tried them all out, every one of them. Okay? And finally, well, who was taken? Esther. Esther the Jewess. And Mordechai, the uncle of Esther, says to her, if you're taken to be the queen, do not divulge under any circumstance your nation or your pedigree. It must be kept a secret. As much as he's going to try to coax it out of you, you're not permitted to reveal who you are, that you're a Jewess. It must be kept a top secret. And she did not divulge it. Now, what is the likelihood? And ultimately it says she found favor in his eyes. He loved her and he married her, and she was pronounced to be queen of the Persian Empire. Now, what are the odds? Here you have a woman, the first queen was the granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar, who destroyed the temple. His granddaughter was a rabid anti-Semite. She's taken out, and who replaces her? Esther, the devoutly righteous woman, who ultimately will bring about the salvation at the end of the day. What are the chances? What are the odds? Almost impossible odds. So you know what you say? These things happen. She became the queen. Achashverosh, as much as he tried to coax her and to bribe her and to convince her to divulge who she is, she would not. Would not. And there was something very interesting about Esther. Because her pedigree was not known, all the different nations of his kingdom somehow always identified with her as if she was from their ethnic group. She was from them. You know, those who spoke with the high fluent English accent, they thought she was one of them. The ones who spoke with the Cockney accent, they thought she was one of them. Everybody thought she was from their pedigree. It was a miracle. And that's why she's beloved by everyone. And Achashverosh realized he has a prize here. But he wanted to get to the bottom of it. Who are you? She would not divulge it. So what did he say? I'm willing to give you half my kingdom, half, if you divulge who you are. She was not bribable, could not get it out of her. Mordechai told her, under no circumstance are you permitted to reveal who you are. Okay? What happens? And he wants to know who she is. So he summons Mordechai, who was a member of the Sanhedrin, who was a world-renowned Jew, and he says to him, initially, when Vashti sinned against her husband, they consulted with the Jews. What should we do with Vashti? She defied the king. So Mordechai was no fool. He said like this, if we advise him to kill her, when he sobers up, you know what the predicament of the Jews are going to be? He's going to say, the reason why I killed my wife is because you Jews advised me to kill her. And then he's going to actually take revenge against the Jews. And if we tell him not to kill her, we can't win, it says. A woman is so defiant, how do you tell me not to kill her? So either way, you can't win. So what did he say? That since we've been sent into exile, the level of clarity we used to have, we no longer have that clarity. We can't advise you. Who gave the advice about having Vashti killed? That was Haman. Haman was from the inner circle of Achashverosh. He's the one who gave the advice. Okay? Left it at that. So finally, he can't tolerate it. She's not willing to tell him who she is. So he summons Mordechai, who's one of the leaders. He was a member of the Sanhedrin, the High Court of Israel, who was a very wise man, who spoke 70 languages. And he says to him, maybe you could advise me. How do I loosen her tongue? How do you loosen her tongue? He says, I'll tell you how. It's a known fact that every woman is jealous of her friend's thigh. That if a man has his eye on another woman, this evokes a tremendous amount of jealousy out of the wife. You know, some bring other women into the palace, you'll see, you're going to loosen her tongue. So therefore, we find in the Megillah tells us there was a second wave of women that were brought into the palace, not to be chosen as the queen, just to expand this harem. Okay? And he still could have loosened her tongue. But the Talmud tells us, if a person indulges in sexual behavior to such a degree, you know what happens? This person is always thirsty. He needs continuously replenishment of fluid, and it's wine. So the two gatekeepers, they were security guys. I'm not sure from what color they were. It does say. They're from Carthage, two Carthaginians. They were the gatekeepers. And all night, normally a person sleeps on the job. They couldn't sleep on the job. You know why? Because all night he was calling for room service. Bring more wine. Because he was thirsty. So what did they say? You know something? We're going to finish it off. We're going to take poison, put it in the wine. He's not going to ask for wine anymore. Okay? And that's what they do. But when they were plotting to poison Achashverosh, you know what happened? It was within the earshot of Mordechai. And these two gatekeepers, because they spoke a language which nobody understood, they figured they could openly speak among themselves. But it was within the earshot of Mordechai. And because Mordechai understood 70 languages, he understood they were plotting to assassinate the king. You know what he did? He immediately sent a message to his niece, Esther, the gatekeepers are plotting to assassinate the king. She immediately shares it with Achashverosh. The investigation is made. Sure enough, it's true. They go and they hang the two gatekeepers. It's recorded in the chronicles of the king. Mordechai the Jew saved the life of the king. You hear this? Now, what's the likelihood two people are plotting to poison the king, and they speak a language nobody understands, and they happen to be within the earshot of Mordechai, who understands 70 language? What's the odd? What's the likelihood of that? Nearly impossible. But you know what the answer is? These things happen. That happens. Okay. Another one, things which are unheard of happening, it happens. A Jewess replaces the one who's the rabbi anti-Semite to become the queen. Mordechai is within the earshot of what? Of these people who don't understand the language, but he understands the language. He happens to overhear the conversation. Okay? Now, Haman rises to power. And this Haman is such a level of evil. He cannot tolerate the existence of any Jew. He's a direct descendant of the Amalekites. He descends from, he's the royalty of Amalek, Haman. Haman would carry, he deified himself. And he became the most prominent member of the inner circle of Achashverosh. He walks in the street, everybody must bow to him. He deified himself. Mordechai would not bow. Could you imagine? This man is an egomaniac, megalomaniac. Everybody's bowing. One Jew doesn't bow. And he's livid. He's seething. To the point, he goes back to his family and he says, I have all this wealth. I have all this prominence. It's all worth nothing to me because that one lousy Jew doesn't bow to me. Yeah, the man has everything because that one Jew would not submit. He says it's not worth it all. So his wife, Zeresh was his wife, Haman's wife. And she says, no, and Zeresh said, no problem. Why don't you build a gallows 50 cubits high and go to the king and have Mordechai hanged on it, finished. You'll end it. He doesn't have to bow to you any longer. He thought it was a great idea. Great idea. And he goes. In the meantime, before the decree was already issued to annihilate every man, woman, and child. And what happens? When he's going to the palace to issue the verdict to have him hanged, Achashverosh can't sleep that night. Hear this? He has trouble sleeping. He's getting older. He needs some melatonin. The pharmacy wasn't a 24-hour pharmacy. So he can't sleep. So he asks one of the valets to bring him the Chronicles of the King. He wants to read. Because what does he think? Maybe the reason why he has trouble sleeping, he owes somebody a favor. And because he didn't pay that person the favor, that person is plotting to kill him. So he wants to go through the Chronicles to see if he has any old favors that he has to pay. And once he knows he's paid them, he'll be able to sleep securely, not to worry. He won't have to look over his shoulder. He's gone through the Chronicles, and one of the people there used to turn the pages for him. As he's about to come to the page about Mordechai saving his life, Mordechai should save his life, the person turns the page. That he shouldn't see it. As much as he turns the page, Hashem sends a malach, turns the page back. And all night, the page is turning, and this person doesn't want, because this person was a rabbi anti-Semite also. He doesn't want Achashverosh to see that Mordechai the Jew was not compensated for what he did. Finally, he sees it. Mordechai the Jew saved the life of the king. Okay? Could you imagine? all of a sudden there's an announcement. Somebody's coming to see the king in the middle of the night. It was such a pressing issue. He wants Mordechai to be hanged. So he's no fool, this Haman. And he says, who's in the courtyard? Haman. He comes in and he says to the king, I'll tell you why I came. A man who the king wants him to be honored and put on a pedestal. I mean, Achshverosh is saying this to Haman. What would you do for him? He's one of a kind of person and you want to honor him, to be recognized, to be special. What would you do for him? So he, being this self-absorbed person, he thought he was talking about him. He says, I would have him ride on the steed of the king, that nobody rides on that horse. And what else? He should wear the regal garments of the king. Okay? And what else? And he should be led through the streets of Shushan, which is the capital of the Persian Empire, declaring to everyone, this is what the king does to the person who he wants to acknowledge and honor. And the one should lead it should be the most prominent member of the Persian government, that he should have that level of honor. So Achshverosh says to him, the Persian emperor says to him, he says, take the horse, take the clothing, and go to Mordechai the Jew, and have him mount my steed, dress him in the regal garments, and you will announce to the world who deserves this acclaim because he honored the king. Could you imagine? Here he's going to put the last nail in Mordechai's coffin. He already built the gallows, and he's coming to get permission to be able to hang Mordechai at the gallows. He couldn't sleep that night. He opens the Chronicles. He comes upon this piece of information. And what happens? He owes Mordechai a debt. Haman at that moment comes to ask, what would you compensate a person? He asks, who deserves that? He believes, being a megalomaniac, it's him. So he says nothing less than what the king deserves. It turns to be the person the king was asking was Mordechai. He's disgraced. Could you imagine? Here he wants to annihilate every man, woman, and child who's a Jew. He wants to have Mordechai hanged at the gallows. And it turns out the man he wanted to destroy, he's the man. He has to display him publicly on the king's horse, the king's regal garments, and to announce to the world, look what the king does to the person who he wants as a claim. So listen what's going on. Mordechai says he comes to Mordechai, Haman. Could you imagine? God forbid, the Gestapo coming to a Beis Medrash and the rabbi's giving a Talmudic lecture. What goes through the rabbi's mind? He's coming to kill me. It's on the Gestapo. And the head of the Gestapo is coming. The head of Gestapo. He's coming to take my life. So when he saw that, he immediately said to his students, disperse, go away, leave me myself. And he begins praying because he figures in a few moments his life's over. He's going to kill him. And he prays and he lets him wait. He finishes praying. Mordechai says, what do you want? He says, I want to ask you, what were you teaching? You were teaching, so what did you teach him? What were you teaching him? He says, I was teaching him the laws that when we had a temple and you would bring a meal offering, you take a palmful of that flour and you bring it as a sacrifice, which is just a small amount. So Haman says to him, to Mordechai, I realize now that your palmful of flour will topple me. With all my power, your handful of flour will topple me. Mordechai didn't understand what he's saying. So he said, I've come to take you due to the order of the king. You should ride his mount. You should be dressed in his regal garments. And you should what? And I should parade you through the streets of Shushan announcing who is the man who the king wants him to be acclaimed. And I will lead you through the streets of Shushan. Okay? Mordechai now takes advantage of the moment. He says, because since you've given the decree about annihilating every man, woman, and child, I've been wearing sackcloth. And my body is not clean. How could I wear regal garments? I must go to the bathhouse before I go and put on those regal garments. It's be the disrespect to the emperor. Meantime, he told Esther, the queen, to give an order to shut down all the bathhouses in Shushan. You hear this? So all the bathhouse keepers were on vacation. He goes to the bathhouse and he has nobody to wash him. He says to Haman, you know something? You have to wash me. So here the viceroy, this pompous, self-absorbed person, he has to get down and he has to bathe Mordechai in the water, that he should be clean. And he dresses him in the regal garments. Now Mordechai has to get on the horse. To mount the horse is not easy. You have to have strength. He says to Haman, he says, I've been fasting all these weeks. I don't have strength to pull myself on the horse. I want you to get down. I'm going to step on your back. And as I'm on your back, I'll get on the horse. You hear this? What Mordechai's doing? He's playing this out to the nth degree. As he gets on Haman's back to mount the horse, he gives Haman a kick in his boot and his backside. You hear? So Haman says, it's not fair. When I'm down and out, you kick me? He doesn't answer him. He says, you're not supposed to treat a person. He said, that's going on Jews, not you. You I could kick. He gets on the horse. He's parading through the streets. Haman had a daughter who was no better than he was, a rabbi anti-Semite. And she sees somebody in the regal garments of the king being paraded on the king's horse throughout Shushan. She thinks her father's on the horse. And Mordechai, the Jew, the leading Jew, is leading her father. You know what she does? She takes a pail filled with feces. She throws it off the roof. And it lands on her father's head. Her father looks up. And she realizes what she did. It's her father. It wasn't Mordechai. Mordechai's riding on the horse. You know what he does? When she realizes, she jumps off the roof and commits suicide. His daughter. Now, Esther immediately, after he's finished parading through the streets, he goes back and tells his wife and his compatriots that he's going off the cliff here. And his wife said to him, Haman, since you've begun falling, you're going to go all the way down. Your day is over. Dawn has come. The day is setting. Your sun has set. It's over. This is an indication. Just short time, you're not going to be alive any longer. Meantime, he gets an invitation. He's invited to the private party of Achashverosh together with Haman. Only the two of them are invited. And he's rushed. He doesn't even have time to bathe. Here he reeks from this feces that his daughter threw on him. Quickly, he changes. He's on his way to this private party. When he's there, the king says to his wife, she never divulged who she is, that she's Jewish. And he says, up to 50% of the kingdom is yours. Now's the time come, a chance. She throws herself on the floor and she starts crying. She says, I want nothing from you. I only want one thing. There's an evil man. He wants to destroy me and my people. Achashverosh goes mad. Somebody wants to destroy my queen and our people. He says, who could he be? And she points her finger right at Haman. Haman, the evil, he's the one. When Achashverosh realizes that, he goes crazy. And he runs out onto the balcony. And when he's out on the balcony, God sent angels who are tearing up his personal garden. Can you imagine? He goes outside, his personal orchard is being devastated by people. But who knows who they are? He runs back in. He finds Haman is pleading for his life. And an angel goes and pushes him onto the bed. And he's on the bed together with Esther. He says, you mean to say you have the audacity? You get with the bed with the queen? He gives the order, take him out. And there was a person named Shacharvon. He says, by the way, there's a gallows, which is 50 cubits high. You can take him on the gallows. He gave the order immediately. Haman was hanged. That was the end of the story. Now, all these events, the likelihood that every one of them should evolve, is it likely? You say these things happen. They happen. They're all random. But if something random, which could be random, repeats itself over and over and over, events which are unheard of, and you take a look at the total picture, what do you see? You see clearly the hand of God behind the scenes, orchestrating and choreograph everything that happens. That's the story of Purim. It was a miracle, but it was a concealed miracle. God's presence was cloaked in nature. Unless you saw all the details, all the various components of what happened, you don't appreciate that it was Hashem. But if you read from the beginning of the Megillah till the end of the Megillah, and you see how the narrative unfolds and evolves, then you understand this is clearly, irrefutably, this is the hand of God. And that's why you don't find the name of Hashem mentioned in Megillah Esther. Because the miracle of Purim was a concealed miracle. And if you hear one event, you say, well, these things happen. But when you have multiple things like this happening, which each one is nearly an impossibility, it's no longer random, but rather this is specific and intentional, and it's God behind the scenes causing it happen exactly as it happened. That's the miracle of Purim. We'll have to stop here. And if you want, maybe tomorrow, we'll just continue this a little bit to get the